Hi, my name is Kylie McKelvie and I'm the President of the PSA. And today we're speaking with Dr. Carlo Caponecchia in relation to workplace bullying. Hi Carlo.
Hi Kylie.
The definition or the description of workplace bullying, what is it used holistically across Australia by WHS agencies?
Okay, so the national guidance that we have in most jurisdictions in Australia now has for many years, for more than 10 years, had the same three criteria. They are basically that typical bullying behaviours have to be repeated, they have to be unreasonable, and they have to create a risk to health and safety. So those are the three main criteria. Each one of those has to be satisfied in order for behaviours to be considered to be bullying.
Yeah.
So not one, not two, but all three together. And that can sometimes be difficult for people. So when we talk about repeated, we mean not just once, but in a pattern of behaviours. When we talk about unreasonableness, what we use there is the very common reasonable person test. So does the hypothetical reasonable person, having an account of all of the situation, all of the circumstances, would they consider the behaviours to be acceptable or not, reasonable or not? And then the risk to health and safety is usually measured in terms of outcomes. So whether the person actually does experience some kind of harm. However, the criteria is that it creates a risk. It's usually indexed by whether that risk has actually become manifest in harm.
Given a single incident of what people could describe as bullying can seriously injure a person within a workplace, what examples or what single incidents can be excluded from the definition of workplace bullying?
The issue of single incidents is a really interesting one and a really important one. And it's come about from both theory and historical practice. And it's in some ways a bit of an anomaly. But we should say up front that while single instances are excluded from the definition of bullying, that doesn't mean that they're unimportant. The guidance says that single instances can be important and should be reported. Sometimes they are very serious and they require action, no matter what, because if they are serious, harm might have already occurred to someone at work. However, sometimes those single incidents are not so serious, and they just need to be monitored. They could constitute a red flag, but they might not. So it's something that people need to just look for and monitor and see whether a trend or a pattern of behaviours starts to happen. I understand it's a really complex area for people though, and usually in WHS practice, if one thing goes wrong, then we want to act on it. And so bullying kind of sits in this kind of strange space of waiting for a pattern of behaviour. But we shouldn't see it in that way. If something happens, we should be doing something. That something might be monitoring what's happening next. It might be just informally collecting some evidence and being prepared to see what might happen next. So it's not a case of doing nothing or ignoring those single incidents. But to meet the criteria, there needs to be a pattern. The criteria have come, as I said, from historical practice. It's there to be conservative, rather than having people jumping up and saying, after one single event, I'm being bullied. So it's about having conservative criteria. And together, those three criteria for bullying are quite conservative. It's quite difficult to meet all of those three criteria. I think it's appropriate for us to have conservative criteria for bullying. We don't want everything to be bullying. We want people to really be reporting only when it's actually happening. So that's where it's come from.
Great. So have you got any advice for people it's really hard sometimes when you're feeling bullied and you're not sure what to do. You're concerned about raising those concerns because you're fearful that you're going to be bullied more. What's your advice, or what steps can people take if they feel like they're being bullied?
Well, you're right. It's a very common observation that people are concerned about reporting. Many years ago, the Garling report here in New South Wales that looked at New South Wales health, people probably don't remember that, it was so long ago, but Garling found even then that nurses were reporting that to report being bullied was, quote, professional suicide.
Yes.
It's still the case in many occupations around the country, not just in New South Wales. So reporting is a really, really big issue. My advice for people is, firstly, they need to read the guidance in their jurisdiction. So read the guide and get some assistance in reading that guide. It's not necessarily something that's easy for everyone to do. So get some assistance from family, friends, from your union delegate in accessing and using that information.
So refer to your policy or your procedure within your local workplace.
Absolutely. You need to look at the policy in your workplace, if there is one, and be guided in that by the national guidelines of what there should be. So basically read everything that's available about what should be happening. That'll help you understand your position. It'll help you understand, hopefully help you understand what's happening and what further steps to take. But I think it's really important for a cold look at the situation. So sometimes when people are feeling that they might be bullied, it's very, very hard to separate the emotion from that. And so trying to get some assistance to look at it in a more objective way is really, really important for everyone involved. So that's an important first step. If you do go further, you need to have some clear evidence of the particular behaviours, and that means dates and places and times and witnesses recorded, hopefully at the same time.
So keep a diary of these.
So keeping a diary is a great idea.
Yeah.
You should be keeping that not in your workplace and not just electronically. It should be kept by you personally at home, for example. But I don't want to encourage people to just go out and start making diary notes about everything. This is in situations where you've got some information already. So you're not just feeling that you're being bullied. You're feeling that you've been bullied. You've accessed the information in your workplace policy, in the national guidance. You've talked to people about this. And then you're moving on to collecting evidence. Collecting evidence is very, very important. Should you need to make a report? Should there be an investigation? That kind of evidence is really important. And most importantly, seek support. So you might need some emotional support. You might need to access the Employee Assistance Program if your employer offers that service. You might need social support from your family and friends.
Fantastic. And I guess that's where we can help assist as well from the union's perspective.
Sure.
To assist. So a lot of our members raise issues in relation to bullying and they're sent down a grievance path. Is there a difference between a grievance and workplace bullying?
Well, there should be. A lot of organisations have a grievance path, as you say, a grievance policy and a set of procedures. This is used differently by different organisations, so it's important that people understand what the grievance policy in their organisation is actually for. What is it designed to deal with? Historically, grievance procedures have often been around procedural issues or hours of work or payment levels and those kinds of things for which you might lodge a grievance and have those resolved relatively easily. Bullying should be reported like any other hazard. That's the pathway that you should be sent down. Not a grievance procedure, not a complaints procedure, a hazard report.
So utilise your work health and safety component.
Work health and safety. It's part of WHS. It's part of the organisation's WHS responsibilities. And really, it should be dealt with as a report like any other report. There's a number of advantages to that. As you know, when you make a hazard report, it has to be followed up by the organisation. So making it as a report is a powerful way of hopefully ensuring that there is some follow-up of that reported issue. The other problem with the whole grievance complaints pathway is that it operates under a different framework to WHS, a different set of assumptions, if you like. So complaints and grievances operate under a human resources issue resolution kind of framework, where the focus is on resolving an issue quickly.
Yes.
Finishing the story.
Hopefully.
Yeah. And that's good and it's appropriate for those kinds of issues. We want to resolve issues, yes. However, a WHS framework is about managing risk, preventing harm, managing risk. And so it's not just about drawing a line under an issue. It's about managing that risk as it's presented right now and as it presents potentially into the future. And so it's a more proactive, a more forward-looking kind of process. And that's the one that we should be using to manage this risk.
That's great, and that'd be really effective where there's multiple people in the workplace feeling the same pressures or feeling that they're being bullied, because they'll be all collated individually through the intranet and their WHS systems to record those incidents, and therefore they can be followed up. That's great advice. Thanks, Carlo. What has been learnt about bullying and psychological risks in the recent past?
Well, as I said, the research field has really grown. Many more people around the world have come into researching workplace bullying. They all have different perspectives and they all work in different jurisdictions as well. So how bullying is viewed and treated legally or otherwise in different jurisdictions is very different. I guess the main trend that has happened is that we've now moved very much towards seeing bullying as a systemic issue. So rather than treating it as an individual problem, as a one person or a dyadic kind of two people together who don't get along, so thinking about it as a personality clash or as an individual issue, we're seeing we're much more consistent in our view of it being a systemic issue. So what I mean by that is that it's not just about those individuals, but about how the organisation is designed, what its policies are, what its actions are, and how it's seen to treat these problems. I think that's kind of the major trend in the research. We've also moved from doing a lot of work on prevalence of how common is bullying and what are the outcomes of bullying, to looking a little more deeper now. So the field has really grown up, if you like. And now it's recognised that we really need to do more work on interventions and researching interventions and researching the implementation of those interventions, more so than looking at the sort of causal contributing factors, the antecedents and the prevalence. So I believe the most recent findings in New South Wales were that about 33% of public servants witnessed bullying in the last year, and 18% said that they experienced it. Those figures are pretty high. Part of the reason that they're high is because of the methodology. So when you ask a straight out sort of perceptual question, do you feel you've been bullied, you tend to get a higher response of saying yes, than if you ask it in a slightly different way, what we call a behavioural experience way, where, not to get too technical, but where you ask people whether they've experienced particular behaviours without mentioning the word bullying. So sometimes the way that you ask the question can lead to different results. But on the face of it, when asked if they were bullied, if they have experienced bullying, 18% of people said that they'd experienced that.
What are the risk factors that show up regularly when bullying is prevalent?
There are a range of risk factors that are commonly found. They include things like having a hierarchical management structure and organisational structure, things like management commitment to these kinds of issues, to prevention and management of these kinds of issues. Situations where you have a really diverse workforce. Sometimes people can be targeted based on one or more characteristics. Sometimes people want to talk about gender, but I think the important thing to think about in relation to gender is the gender mix. So it can be as difficult for a female in an all-male workplace as for a male in an all-female workplace. So it's not gender per se, but about the relative dimensions of that. Of course, issues around quality of supervision and workplace relationships and the sort of generic culture that exists in the workplace always come out as risk factors. The other kinds of risk factors are the sort of general sort of stress risk factors that we might talk about. So different people from different perspectives call them different things. Sometimes they're called stressors, sometimes they're called antecedents. But we're talking about things like the amount of control people have in their work, the amount of autonomy they have to decide when to do things and how to do things, similar to consultation. Issues around workload, work pace, work schedule, and we've mentioned relationships and supervision, but also things like role conflict and role ambiguity. So role conflict is being asked to, in your role, to do things that are in apparent conflict with one another. So, for example, in a call centre, being asked to provide great customer service, but don't spend too long on the phone.
Yeah.
That's an inherent conflict in the role. And role ambiguity is not being sure about what your role actually is, not being sure who does what, when and how, and those kinds of things. So those are the kind of general stressors, and those are prevalent in situations of bullying as well.
I'd like to thank Carlo for coming in today and discussing workplace bullying with us. It was great to ascertain that workplace bullying is a risk and that some work is going to be done in relation to prevention and not just looking at investigating matters. So I'd like to thank you, Carlo, for coming today and discussing with us workplace bullying.
Pleasure, Kylie. Hope it was useful.